book. You think about starting with Cyrus's decree in 550 BC in Ezra chapter 1 and how that sets the stage for three different returns. There were three departures, not departures really, sieges by Babylon to take them out before the 70 years of captivity, and then three returns to bring them back. And so that first return is Zerubbabel's job in 536 BC. And we get to work on the temple. The second return down there in 456 BC is what we're looking at now. At the end of the book of Ezra, he's come back during that time. But of course, we had a problem, and that problem was these pagan marriages. And so they needed to deal with that problem because they had disobeyed God's law. And so they are going to abandon these marriages, and really what they're doing is they're abandoning their sin. It doesn't mean they're abandoning the people, they're abandoning what they want to do and how they had set it up the way they wanted instead of the way that God wanted. So that's what we're looking at this morning. And where we had left off last time was, if I can get it up here, verses 5 through 8. And you remember in verses 5 through 8, we had a meeting called because so far we've only had record of the leaders discussing this problem. But now in verses 5 through 8, this meeting is for everyone to show up. And what was the penalty if they didn't show up? Yes, they're going to lose all their property. Whatever property that they own, their portion of the land that has been designated to them. If you don't show up, you lose that. And that's a good reminder. You know, is that fair? Right? Don't we believe in personal property rights? Is that fair for them to do that? Well, it is, but why?
It was a land that God gave them. It's not their land.
Yeah.
Like if you don't show up to pay your rent.
That's exactly right.
A landlord has the right to kick you out.
That's right. This is more like if you don't pay your rent or if you don't pay your mortgage, there's going to be consequences. And Roman points out, rightly so, this is the land that God had given them. And there were terms and conditions that were set upon that, weren't there? This is a good land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. You're going to do well here. There's going to be abundance here. In fact, there's cities that you haven't built there that you can live in. And there's vineyards that you haven't planted that you can use and that you can eat from and so forth. And God was going to protect them. But there were terms and conditions to that. Well, those terms, that law is still in effect. And so if they're going to decide, no, God, we're going to do what we want to do and we're going to keep these marriages that were not lawful for us to keep, and God says, well, you violated the terms. And so you don't get your land. And this is a very fair thing for Ezra to do based on the principles of God's word. So let's read 5 through 8 to just refresh our memory of where we're going here and then see what happens next in the account. Verse 5. Then Ezra arose and made the leaders of the priests, the Levites, and all Israel swear an oath that they would do according to this word, so they swore an oath. Then Ezra rose up from before the house of God and went into the chamber of Jehohanan, the son of Eliashib. And when he came there, he ate no bread and drank no water, for he mourned because of the guilt of those from the captivity. And they issued a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all the descendants of the captivity that they must gather at Jerusalem, and that whoever would not come within 3 days, according to the instructions of the leaders and elders, all his property would be confiscated, and he himself would be separated from the assembly of those from the captivity. That sounds really harsh, but again, you know, what are you saying if you don't come, if you don't show up to the meeting? And again, they don't even know what the meeting's about yet. You have to be willing to be part of us. If you're gonna hold on to the blessings of being a part of the nation, then you have to take on the responsibilities that come with being a part of the nation. And we can certainly, I think, in our land today, we can relate with that, can't we? Don't we know people who are really enjoying the blessings of this nation, but aren't really owning up to their responsibilities as citizens of this nation? And so we can understand why this would be as harsh as it is, I think. And so this meeting has been called. They need to show up. And this, can you imagine if you will, the pit that Ezra must have felt in the bottom of his stomach as he's watching these people show up. And he knows the news that he has to deliver to them. He realizes that this is not necessarily going to be a fun meeting. It's a necessary one. They have to talk about this. They want to be right with God. This is necessary. It's not necessarily pleasant. And sometimes you and I have to be involved in things that aren't necessarily pleasant, but are obligations. And they must take place, and they're needed. And it's going to make things better in the long run. We know that. And so short-term pain and discomfort for long-term success is what we're looking for here in this section.
Didn't you establish that they had been there for quite some time
Yeah.
in this situation? When they had children, I don't know that they...
Yeah, they did.
I don't know that they had grandchildren, but just the children.
Right. We don't know exactly when this would start taking place, but you think about how much time we have. So how much time is between 536 and 456? So that's plenty of, you've got, 70 years there. That's plenty of time for things to, did I get that math right? I became a preacher, so I didn't have to do math. But I think it's 70.
Well, and the point, too, is he said, talking about the sin of those of the captivity.
Yeah.
So some of the original people that came back from Babylon. So I can't help but think that they knew what they were doing.
Yes.
No, maybe not everybody.
Not everybody, certainly.
I'd say quite a lot of them knew what
Yeah.
they had done and with the situation they were in. So I kind of wonder if the pit in his stomach was, I've got to tell these people something they don't want to hear.
That's right. I think that's it. They don't want to hear it, and I got to say it. This is the burden of leadership, right? And what kind of leader would he be if he just said, no, we'll just go on and allow it to continue the way it's been going on?
Or to even say from this point forward, we're not doing this, but it's sort of grandfather the rest of it in.
Yeah, well, he could think about it. Right, he could think about compromising, but if you compromise, what are you telling God? Well, what you're telling God is that, okay, so God, you need to tolerate the sins over the last 70 years, and just from this point forward, we expect you not to tolerate. I mean, you don't get to set those terms for God as far as what he's going to tolerate and what not. That's not our place. We're the creation, not the creator, and that's certainly tempting. And that power, I think, of leadership goes to people's heads sometimes, where they think, well, I'll figure out a better way. I'll lead the people in what I think is a better way. And what leadership needs to recognize is Jesus is the chief shepherd. And so any kind of leadership roles we have are shepherds in a sense, whether it be the elders or parents or, what have you. We are under the chief shepherd. We've still got to follow his path that he has set for us. Okay, so the news is delivered starting in verse 9 here. So all the men of Judah and Benjamin gathered at Jerusalem within 3 days. It was the 9th month, on the 20th of the month, and all the people sat in the open square of the house of God, trembling because of this matter and because of heavy rain. Then Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, "You have transgressed and have taken pagan wives, adding to the guilt of Israel. Now therefore make confession to the Lord God of your fathers, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples of the land and from the pagan wives." Okay. A couple things here. They're trembling. The text says for 2 reasons. They're trembling because they can tell, can't they? And maybe whispers have gone out now. Maybe some people know what this is about, but this can't be good, right? If he's collecting all of us here for this meeting, and so they're trembling because of that, but they're also trembling because of the heavy rain. And so it's this, you get this picture of what it's like when they're there, and it's like the weather is matching the what's the right word? Is it the dour circumstances that they're in? It's almost like poetic that we've got the heavy rain matching the situation here. But one thing that tells us is they didn't wait for a good time to do this. It's not convenient for them to be standing out there in the rain. But you can see how pressing this matter is, how important it is. No, we're not going to wait until the rain lets up. Let's not wait till the rainy season's over. We're going to take care of this now. We're not going to delay. Let's think about that practically. If someone had in their mind, I don't really want to do this, and so any excuse is as good as another to put this off, And so let's wait till the rainy season's over. What would happen during that period of waiting?
Could get worse, they could find another reason to postpone it again.
It would get worse. You could look for other reasons to postpone. Did I hear something else?
He would become mellow and be forgiven a little more all the time. He would lose his confidence of what he was actually going to do.
Mm-hmm. You know, right now, Ezra is in a state of, mourning, but also great zeal to get this right. And if you don't want to do it, and then you set in delays and start to procrastinate, that gives Satan time to work, doesn't it? And he can work on your mind a little bit and say, well, do we really have to? And isn't there another way? And couldn't we? And so if you put it off, you might end up not doing what you need to do. A wise man once told me what his wise grandfather told him. So this is nearly ancient advice at this point, because he's old and dead and gone, and his grandfather certainly. He said, if you've got something that you need to do that you don't want to do, don't wait. Go ahead and get it done. Go ahead and get it done. Don't delay. The longer you wait, the longer you delay, the worse that's going to get. So you got to go ahead and take care of it. And sometimes situations fall in our lap that are not our fault. It's like getting hit in the face with a dead rat. You got to deal with it. Right? I mean, look, nobody wants to be hit in the face with a dead rat. But you can't just leave the dead rat laying there on the floor. You got to deal with it. Yeah.
I think it's important to note the time frame that he gives them to get there too. And the first time I thought about it, I was like, well, that's not a whole lot of time. But I mean, this isn't like King Solomon's Israel.
Right.
They've just returned from captivity. They all basically live there.
That's right.
It gives just enough time, or plenty of time, for him to get the messengers the message, that message to get to them, and then the journey there.
That's right.
As opposed to, in olden times before that, it would take 3 days or more just to get there.
It would take, you think about it, if this were in Solomon's day, it would take 3 days just to prepare for the journey, to start to get there. And then, and so everyone, you see, no one's moving too far out from Jerusalem by this time. Because, that's basically you're asking for trouble. You're asking to not make it, right? Because there's no protection. There's barbarians. It's a bad situation. And so everyone's going to be relatively close at this time to the center to try to have that security. So you're right, Roman. It is plenty of time for them to get there. Okay, so they're trembling. It's the rainy season. Verse 10. He says, you've transgressed, you've taken the pagan wives, and you've added to the guilt of Israel. Now, that's the accusation, right? This is what you've done. Then the solution is offered in the next verse. Now, therefore, verse 11, make confession and do his will. When we have done wrong, when we have sinned against God, it is not enough to just admit the mistake. If you stop there, you've not gone far enough. They need to admit the mistake and be willing to say, God is right, I've been wrong, and so I'm changing my mind about this. This is repentance. I'm changing my mind, and I'm going to go God's way now, and I'm going to own up to this. And so then what do you have to do? The other side of repentance, you have to actually do it. You have to actually change and make the correction. And so both things are necessary here in verse 11. Notice also that we get the problem followed by the solution. This is what a messenger of God, a spokesman for God, needs to be able to do. It is not enough to preach the truth about the sin. Also must be preached the truth about the solution. There has to be hope. God's message is a message of hope. Preachers aren't really doing their jobs. Bible class teachers aren't really doing their jobs. The church as a whole is the pillar and ground of the truth. We're not doing our jobs if all we're showing the world is, here's the problems, here's the problems, here's the problems. we have to be able to offer the solution. And don't you get irritated at those kind of people? I don't know what it's like if you're in a work meeting or if you're in some kind of group, setting, and you've got someone in the group who all they can come up with is the reason why the ideas that are being presented won't work. Well, that won't work. Well, that won't work. That's a dumb idea. Don't do that. And they have no solution. That's not how our God is. Our God gives us a solution. And this is the solution. You may not like the solution. It may not be something that you're necessarily excited about. But it is a solution. And so he tells them, finally the message has been delivered to all the people. Separate from your pagan wives. You need to separate yourselves from this idolatry and that influence that's being brought in. Any questions or comments? Okay, what's going to happen? Verse 12. Let's read 12 through 15. Then all the assembly answered and said with a loud voice, "Yes, as you have said, so we must do. But there are many people. It is the season for heavy rain, and we are not able to stand outside, nor is this the work of 1 or 2 days. For there are many of us who have transgressed in this matter. Please let the leaders of our entire assembly stand, and let all those in our cities who have taken pagan wives come at appointed times, together with the elders and judges of their cities, until the fierce wrath of our God is turned away from us in this matter." Only Jonathan, the son of Ahazel, and Jahaziah, the son of Tikvah, opposed this. And Meshullam and Shabbatai, the Levite, gave them support. Okay. Now, this is difficult in some ways because God doesn't give us a lot of extra details here. And so there's a few things that we have to wonder about and even guess at a little bit, but I think it can lead to some interesting discussion here. So, first of all, verse 12, how do you think Ezra feels? Verse 12. Oh, so relieved. So relieved, because this could have gone any number of ways, right? There could have been some real pushback, a little bit of a revolt, maybe a mutiny of sorts, a coup. Get this guy out of here. We don't need him in charge of us. They're willing to admit the problem themselves, and that's good. That's really promising here. Now, the difficulty, though, is what do we make of these responses beyond that? You dig down a little deeper, and they say, we can't do this. In verse 13, we can't do this immediately. So one line of thinking is maybe they're making excuses, right? Maybe they are trying to delay and put this off so that somehow they can skirt by. I think that's less likely than just this is the facts of the matter. And this is not something that we can do in 1 or 2 days. Because you think about it, there now need to be a lot of conversations that are had. There needs to be some discussion because not everybody's in the same boat. Well, what if I'm married to a pagan who's proselytized? She's become a faithful Jew. Or what if she's willing to? What if she's willing to renounce her idolatry? And then, too, there could have been, there's lineage that you have to look at. You have to meet with the judges of your cities, they're saying, because there's more to this than just who we are and what the situation is. And, some people might try to slide through on some kind of technicality or try to hide the fact of idol worship taking place in the house. And so there needs to be some sort of judgment from an impartial source here to get this right. And so I think that's more likely the answer here. I don't think they're not willing to do what's right, but I think they're looking at the scope of what has to take place. And then beyond that, what has to happen for these people that are put away? Well, they have to be provided for. And so we need to figure out if these marriages are being dissolved, then where are these people going? And where are they going to live? And how are they going to be taken care of? How are they going to eat? So there are arrangements that need to be made too. And so we need a formal system to take care of this kind of situation. And so they say, let's put it on the leaders. Verse number 14, those in each city will have appointed times for these people to come. And then what we'll do is we'll do this until, look at that word until in verse 14, towards the end of the verse. That word until is very important. We're going to work at this until we get to what point? Until the wrath of God is turned away. So what does that mean? We're going to work at this until God's satisfied, until we've done it, until we've accomplished it.
That shows sincerity in the idea they're presenting. And I almost think that the person or persons presenting this idea didn't take wives from other nations. I haven't done anything wrong, and I don't want to stand here in the rain for 2 or 3 days. So why don't you do it this way, and the rest of us are going home.
Yeah,
In the meantime, we can set up the system and get it done right.
That's right. We can't stand out here for 4 days, 5 days straight and deal with all this. We all need to go to our cities. And, and city, don't think like Nashville and Gallatin and Portland and, don't think like that. It's at this point going to be little tiny communities. So we're going to go back and we'll take care of it there and make sure it gets done right. Yes, ma'am. Is that a hand?
Okay, is it me but didn't they have multiple wives back then?
That's a good question.
Because if they're taking wives, and it says wives, it don't specifically, because it says wives. And it's all these guys that they're saying the names of, but every show you see actually has a whole big bunch of wives there that they've got. So it might be getting them down to where it's only one wife and one man and one woman like God intended it to be.
Yeah. I don't think we have a lot of information about how they looked at that during this period of time. That would be an interesting research. Do you want to do a research paper for me?
No, I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
good at research.
No, it would though.
I'm good at asking the questions, but I'm not good at research.
That's fine. That's fine. I've never heard anything about. I'd like to. Maybe I need to do this in all my spare time. I need to do some research on following the views of marriage among God's people through the time, because really the only polygamy we see mentioned in the Bible, once we get to the nation, is with the kings. As far as I know, there may be instances.
But if it's good enough for the king, isn't it good enough for the people?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay, you go with it, though.
You know,
That's what they're going to think.
yeah.
So.
I do think over time we see polygamy being rejected by the Jews, whereby it's still accepted by the pagans, by the Gentiles. Because by the time you get to the New Testament church, the mention of, an elder being the husband of one wife, for example, my understanding is, and I could be corrected on this, my understanding is that that was really more for the Gentile Christians, because that wasn't really seen among the Jews during that period of time. And it wouldn't surprise me at all, too. What I do know about Jewish religious thought over this history is they got a whole lot more conservative. And that would lead to people looking back to the law of Moses and saying, hey, you know what? In the beginning, it was Adam and Eve. And there weren't multiple wives. That's how God set up marriage. So I think probably by this time, maybe we're seeing the end of polygamy among the Jewish people.
Part of this is the English language itself, because it talks about they took pagan wives.
Yeah, it doesn't mean.
That doesn't mean they all married a pagan wife. It doesn't mean that they necessarily married multiple wives.
Right.
When you go to the New Testament, you're talking about looking at the qualifications of deacon, and it says the deacons and their wives.
Right.
Are they all married to the same woman?
No, it's multiple deacons with multiple wives. Yeah.
You see how that
Exactly.
plays?
It would be exactly the same as if we said, okay, if all of our wives in the auditorium could stand up, Well, if I say our wives, does that mean you're all my wife? No, it means our, all the husbands here. And my wife is shaking her head vigorously. No, you do not have multiple wives. I saw you out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, no, that's so. Some of it is in the way the language works there. I don't think it necessarily means they're polygamous, but I wonder how it was viewed during this time. You would have to. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you'd have to look into. You'd have to look for nuggets of information about how the Persians looked at that and what would be allowed in their society. That'd be interesting too. I don't know. I don't know. You stumped the preacher. Good job. Yeah.
I also got to think about the time that Jesus was starting his ministry, he specifically spoke on the fact that people were divorcing their wives at a high rate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if divorce was such an easy thing to obtain, they probably wouldn't have one for one.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily, because the way that it was thought of is if I have more wives, then I can have more children, and that's free labor. And so they saw a real benefit to it, and kind of ignored the obvious problems with it in order, the people who engaged in that. So, but that's a good thought to bring into mind here too, and we're going to talk about Jesus dealing with that in a minute here. Maybe not today, but maybe next week, depending on how far we go. Yeah.
I would almost conjecture here, since they're coming back and they're trying to be super focused on what the law says,
Mm-hmm.
and Ezra comes in and looks at what's happening, I feel like, and this just may be a little bit of a leap for me, I don't know, I feel like if that was a problem, it would have been listed with this.
Yeah.
He would have said that not only have you taken pagan wives, but you're taking multiple wives, even though the law doesn't state that.
Yeah. I think you've got good instincts here, Roman. Roman's saying that he feels like it would have been mentioned here specifically if that was a problem that they were dealing with at this time. And so since it's not, probably best to assume that it wasn't. And I think those are good instincts. I think that's a good way to look at this. Okay. Now, we also have some opposition in verse 15, don't we? And this could go a number of different ways too. It could be that they're opposed to the whole idea, and that they're saying, no, we don't think we should do this at all. We don't think we should separate ourselves. Or it could be on the other direction, that these guys are so, what's the right word? That they are so vigilant about wanting to keep the law of God that they're saying, no, let's not send people home. That just leaves time, let's all stay here until we take care of this. The text, as far as I can tell, does not indicate what direction their opposition goes. So, but we can make some application about that. So, if what we're doing as a group at the Fountainhead Church of Christ is the right thing to do, just because there is some opposition does not mean we shouldn't go ahead and do it. Now, certainly we need to consider, how big is the opposition? What's their point? Is it a good point? Do we need to think about this? But if leadership has figured out that this is the way we need to go, this is what's right for us, and then there's just 4 or 5 people with some dissenting voices, we want everyone to be on the same page, but that's not always possible. And if it's the right thing to do, we need to go ahead and do the right thing. Now, let's talk about it from the other angle. Well, I'll ask, any questions or comments about that first?
Ross, I would almost think it's the solution itself, because if not, then, we got the rest of the chapter. I don't see Ezra speaking out against these 4 guys.
Right. There's no wrath and punishment against, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, well, you're opposed to God, then go. And you
Yep.
didn't mention that at all, so I would assume it's let's do it in this phasing, and they're probably like, no, let's just do it now, it's done.
Yeah. And the thing is, though, if it is the other way, I think you're right, but if it is the other way, and we apply that to us, okay, so let's say we've made some decision and there's 5 people who don't like it. Well, what are we gonna do about that? Are we gonna let 5 people's loud dissenting voices keep us from doing what we know is right? How are we going to respond? I know we want everybody to agree, but that doesn't always happen. Go ahead.
Considering there were some Levites that supported their resistance,
Mm-hmm.
their opposition, it almost makes it sound like their opposition was, this is too easy. It should go faster, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's what I was saying is the other way.
More on the conservative side of it, saying, no, we need to be a whole lot faster about getting this fixed.
Yeah.
Maybe, it doesn't say, but they were supported by some of the Levites, so maybe they were zealous, I guess.
Yeah, I want to address that in just a minute. Let me deal with this first and say, I think we will always be on the side of, no, we're going to do what's right. You know, there's a few people who disagree, but we're going to do what's right. We always are going to be on that side unless we're one of the ones who disagree, right? It's so easy to say, let's do what the majority knows to be right when you're not one of the few. And so we need to have great patience for people who have a different perspective and a different point of view, and be very kind and gentle as we still continue to go what we know is the right way. Now, if it's the other side, like Mike and Roman are suggesting, and let's say, no, this isn't fast enough for us. They agree with we need to put away the pagan wives, but we need to deal with this in a different way. We've got a better plan here, although that doesn't seem to be offered. But we're opposed to this. Well, how do we deal with that?
Is it not just meeting minutes? It seems like meeting minutes to me, which would support the historicity of this as
Yeah.
a real record of something that really happened. Because if you were just making this up, why would you throw in these extra characters and never have any reference to them?
Yeah. So Summer says, and I think there's some validity to this, that this looks like someone was taking minutes for a meeting, you know, and you got your notes for the meeting, and so everyone agreed, except these who, you know, everyone said aye, and then these four said nay, right? And so, okay, so we've got the official record that they said nay, that they voted no to this plan. I don't know if that's exactly the case or not, but it's a real thing that you have to deal with. Okay, there's a few that don't like the plan. So what are we going to do about the few who don't like the plan? First, let me talk to the few. If there are a few who don't like the plan, but you still agree with the overall direction, then be okay with that. You voice your opinion. I think we can do this a better way, but if you're not in leadership, if you're not in charge, you need to be willing to follow even if you don't totally agree on the judgment matters of how to get it done, right? If you are the many and there are few, they don't need to be ostracized. If they're still willing to go along with the plan, you know, if they're willing to say, no, we want to get to that end where we take care of this until the wrath of God has been turned away with us, then we can still be all together and we can still be united even if we have a few little differences of opinion here and there. So let's keep that in mind too when we find ourselves in similar situations. Other thoughts? Okay. You know, I don't think I ever asked, am I supposed to end class at 9:35 or 9:40? 40? Good. That means I've got 3 more minutes. All right, buckle up. So, we had a few who opposed, but verse 16 just goes on to say, then the descendants of the captivity did so. And Ezra the priest with certain heads of the fathers' households were set apart by the fathers' households, each of them by name, and they sat down on the first day of the 10th month to examine the matter. By the first day of the first month, they finished questioning all the men who had taken pagan wives. Okay, so look at this time jump here. So they arrived when? If you back up, let's see, verse, what is it? Verse 9, yep, verse 9, we're in the 9th month and the 20th day of the month, okay? And then we jump forward here and we're taking care of this and we're sitting down on the first day of the 10th month, so that's just a few days later, okay? And then verse 17, by the first day of the first month, they finished questioning all the men. So that we got to that stage in about 3 months, okay? And so that's pretty quick work, I think, when you're talking about you've got to question everybody and make sure everybody's good, those who haven't done wrong and those who have. And so it seems like they're being very diligent about getting this done, and they're not waiting around, but they're following through with the plan that they set. Verse 18. And among the sons of the priest who had taken pagan wives, the following were found of the sons of Jeshua, the son of Josadak, and his brothers, Maaseiah, Eleazar, Jerib, Gedaliah, and they gave their promise that they would put away their wives, and being guilty, they presented a ram of the flock as their trespass offering. So one key point here, we've even got it among the priesthood, but one key point is the type of offering that they gave. So I've heard a few people mention, did they know, did they not know how guilty they were? They offered a trespass offering. They could have offered a presumptuous sin offering, but that's not what they offered. So the difference is, if they had offered an offering of presumptuous sin, that would be saying, we knew that we were in violation of your law, and presumptuously so, we just continued on with what we wanted to do anyway. But instead, offering a trespass offering indicates that they made this transgression in ignorance. Just because you are ignorant when you commit the sin, you didn't know it was wrong, doesn't mean that you're not guilty of the sin. You still have to offer the sacrifice and make the restitution. Okay, thank you so much. We'll pick up next time. The lesson is yours.